Seed starting season is a time of excitement and anticipation, but it can also be a time of confusion. Why aren't they growing? They sprouted nicely. I did what I was supposed to do. I gave them water. I put them under light. I gave them some airflow, but they're not growing. These pepper seedlings are going on 6 weeks since they germinated, and their growth is incredibly stunted. Sure, there are a couple of true leaves coming out, but the plants aren't getting any bigger. The stems don't seem to be getting any thicker. They're certainly not getting any taller. And I bet if I were to remove these plants from their cells, the root systems really wouldn't be much to speak of. So let's talk about what I've found to be the main culprit, keeping your seedlings from growing big and strong. What we think of to give our plants once they germinate are three things: light, water, and airflow. We take for granted the soil side of things because these are already in soil, right? When it comes to starting seeds, many gardeners, including this one, will advise to use a seed starting mix, a benign growing medium made of peat or cocoa coir, perlite, vermiculite. Ingredients that help with water retention but also aeration. It gives the seeds room to breathe so they can germinate and they can start to grow some roots. Light and water can't do it alone. They can't provide the three key macronutrients that your plants need in order to grow big and strong: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So now that your seeds have germinated and your seedlings have emerged and you have them under light and you're giving them water, you also need to give them some nutrition. And the seed starting mix that you used in order to germinate the seeds is not going to give them the nutrition that they need. So there are a couple of things that we can do. We can take these seedlings and we can pot them up into a potting soil that has an all-purpose slow-release fertilizer. Another thing that you can do is to fertilize. And you have to be careful about fertilizing seedlings. They're still very, very delicate. So watch the ratios of NPK that you're using and make sure that you're not overdoing it as you water your seedlings. For the purposes of demonstration, some of these pepper seedlings, I'm going to do liquid feed. Some others, I'm going to pot them up into a potting mix with an all-purpose fertilizer. And then a couple others, they're going to be my sacrificial lambs. They'll be my control group so we can track progress and note the results of fertilizing some seedlings versus just giving some light and water. So let's go. Let's get to work on these seedlings. I'll show you the process of potting some of these up into potting soil and then applying a liquid feed to some others while leaving a control group in their seed starting mix. Now, of course, you want to be careful with these plants. They're very, very delicate at this stage in their life. But you have to make sure that they're being fed, and they're not going to be fed if they continue to sit in this seed starting mix. Fill up a pot with some potting soil that has some good all-purpose slow-release fertilizer. Make sure that the potting soil is nice and moist but not soggy, and transplant your seedling very carefully into the new pot. I like to use a bamboo chopstick so I can create a hole in the potting mix and then just put the plant right inside. At this stage, if your seedlings seem a little bit leggy because maybe they've been reaching for the light, go ahead and bury them a little bit more deeply. Not quite all the way to the leaves, but pretty close. This works really well with tomatoes because of the way that their stems have root hairs all over them, but this also works well with pretty much any other plant that you're starting inside. With these peppers, I would worry a little bit about stem rot if they were a little bit bigger and a little bit more well established. But because these are still really small, brand new seedlings, their stems can absolutely handle being buried a little bit more in the potting mix. And one of the things I'll also do in order to achieve a one-to-one comparison on size of growing vessel is I'll fill one of these larger pots with my seed starting mix and pot up one of these seedlings into that larger pot. I'm also just removing the seed starting mix from some of these cells and replacing it with potting mix. That way we can have a one-to-one comparison on the size of the growing vessel as we consider the differences between these methods. If you're going to use a liquid fertilizer, be very careful with the application. Because these plants are super tiny and vulnerable, I would err on the side of caution when using a liquid feed. If the instructions say to use 1 tablespoon per gallon, I would probably use about a half tablespoon, maybe even just a teaspoon. One of the things that you'll also want to consider if you're going to choose to use liquid feed is what balance of macronutrients the specific plants that you're growing actually need. And this is why an all-purpose fertilizer at this stage is a really good option, because you're making sure that you're giving your plants balanced nutrition. It's going to help the leaves grow, the stems thicken, and the roots strengthen. Now all that's left to do is to take them downstairs, put them under lights, and check them regularly to see how they're doing. So it's only been about a week, but we're already seeing a difference between the pepper seedlings that stayed in the seed starting mix and the pepper seedlings that I potted up into a potting soil that had a little bit of fertilizer in it. Check this out. Between these two, this is the one that got potted up. This is the one that stayed in its original container with the seed starting mix. You can tell the difference not only in the size, and of course, the one that's in the potting mix, it's not like it's huge, but really the key difference here is that you see a lot of true leaves on the one that was potted up into potting soil. That potting mix is giving this seedling food. The potting mix is enabling this seedling to start to grow a good root structure and start to grow up more. So it's growing its true leaves. I'm actually going to get this potted up into a larger pot today. This little guy here is still just sort of going with the flow. It's sitting in a seed starting mix that doesn't have any food. So it's getting light, it's getting air, it's getting water, but it's not getting any nutrition. So in order for this guy to survive, I'm gonna have to pot this up and put it into some potting mix. But I'm excited to do it because it won't be long before it catches up to its friend here. Now the biggest difference that we're seeing is in these two fish peppers. Remember the fish pepper that I potted up, but I kept it in seed starting mix? Well, here it is, and it's just about the same size as it was when I potted it up just about a week ago. Remember the one that I potted up next to it? Same type of pepper. They emerged the same day. They're all the same age, but I potted this up into potting soil. And look at the difference. There's a huge difference between these two peppers. The one that's growing in the potting soil already has multiple sets of true leaves, and you better believe that there's a great root system that's getting established inside of this pot. Take a look at this seedling and notice the difference versus its counterpart that's sitting in the seed starting mix. The seedling that's in the potting mix is very clearly thriving. There's no doubt in my mind that beneath the surface here, there is a root structure that is developing nicely and growing super strongly. I'd be willing to bet that within the next week or week and a half, I'm going to have to pot up this pepper again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pepper that's in the seed starting mix, I'm going to pot it up into its own potting mix, and that way it's going to get a chance to catch up. And you remember the seedlings that I kept in their own container, but I fertilized with a little bit of fish emulsion? That's these two right here. Now, they don't look huge, but that's totally fine because it was a little bit of an experiment. If I were to do it again, I would pot them up into something larger and then fertilize them. However, one of the things that's super cool about this, as you compare it to the ones that are just in the seed starting mix that didn't get any fertilizer, is that the ones without the fertilizer have no true leaves to speak of. So you take a look at this and you say, this is still kind of a puny little pepper seedling, really nothing to speak of. But then you compare it to the one that didn't get any nutrition. This is really just hanging on by its first leaves. This pepper seedling here is at risk of not only not thriving, but literally dying on me. So I have to get this potted up soon so it can not only catch up to this, but I can avoid killing it. And that's the difference that I'm seeing between the ones that we fertilized and the ones that we just let sit in the seed starting mix. It's not about the size, it's about the growth. So they're still growing down beneath the surface. How do we know? Because they're growing true leaves. This one here that got fertilized with a fish emulsion already has 2 sets of true leaves. Now is the traditional time to pot it up, and I'll be potting it up into a larger pot, yes, with some potting soil. And I might even continue to fertilize it a little bit with a quarter or a half mixture of fish emulsion just to continue the experiment and see how things do getting a little bit of extra food versus what comes in the pre-packaged potting mix. But the difference here is clear. You've got to feed your seedlings in order for them to grow. They don't need nutrition when they're germinating because the seed has all of the energy that it needs. But as soon as they emerge, start thinking about getting them into a medium that has a little bit of food. You give them light, you give them water, you give them airflow, give them some nutrition, and they will absolutely thrive. So if you have seedlings that are failing to thrive, don't give up all hope just yet. Think about the things that they need and how you're delivering those things to them. Do they have enough light, water, and airflow? What about the soil? Does the soil have any nutrition in it? If they're still sitting in their seed starting mix, some of your seedlings might actually grow a little bit and seem like they're doing fine. But I'd be willing to bet that most of them are going to look like they're struggling. So pot them up, put them into a medium that has a little bit of food. If you feed your plants now, then they're going to feed you in the garden later. Happy growing.